Marcus Johnson was the man who cleaned the big county courthouse every night. For 15 years, he had walked the same halls, pushing his blue cleaning cart. He was 52 years old, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that showed his age. Most people never really saw Marcus. He was just the man in the blue work clothes who emptied their trash and cleaned their offices after they went home. The courthouse was a busy place during the day. Lawyers in fancy suits rushed through the marble hallways. Judges in black robes walked with importance. People cried, people fought, and people's lives changed forever inside those walls. But at night, when Marcus worked, the building was quiet and peaceful. Marcus liked the night shift. He could think while he worked. He could listen to his small radio that played old jazz music. And most importantly, he could read the papers that lawyers sometimes left behind. Marcus never moved or took anything. He just read quickly and put everything back exactly where he found it. What nobody at the courthouse knew was that Marcus had a secret. Every morning, after his night shift ended, he would go to a small office in the poor part of town. There, he ran a free legal help center for people who couldn't afford lawyers. For 4 hours each day, he helped people with their housing problems, their custody battles, and their small business questions. Marcus had gone to law school many years ago. He had even graduated at the top of his class. But life had taken some hard turns, and he ended up needing a steady job with good benefits. The courthouse janitor position had given him that security. And secretly, it also gave him a window into the legal world he still loved. On a Monday morning in early spring, Marcus was finishing his shift. The sun was just coming up, making the big courthouse windows glow. He was mopping the floor outside courtroom number 3 when he heard loud voices. This was unusual because the courthouse didn't open to the public for another 2 hours. "I don't care what you have to do, Richard. Just make it happen." The voice was sharp and angry. "This case could make our firm millions. Do you understand? Millions." Marcus kept mopping but slowed down to listen. He recognized that voice. It belonged to Charles Bennett, one of the most famous lawyers in the city. Charles came from a rich family that had produced 3 generations of successful attorneys. He went to Harvard Law School and now worked at Bennett, Price, and Holden, the biggest law firm in the state. Charles walked out of the conference room, talking on his phone. He was tall and handsome, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. He didn't even glance at Marcus as he walked by, just continued his loud phone conversation. "Yes, I've got the Henderson file right here," Charles said. "We're going to crush this little community group. They think they can stop our client's development project with some sob story about historical significance. Please, it's just an old building in a rundown neighborhood." Marcus kept his head down, but his ears perked up. He knew about this case. The Henderson Development Company wanted to tear down the old Carter building to build expensive apartments. The Carter building had been one of the first black-owned businesses in the city. It had survived riots, storms, and hard times. Now it might be destroyed for profit. What Charles didn't know was that the small community group fighting to save the building had come to Marcus's free legal clinic last week. They couldn't afford a big lawyer like Charles Bennett. They were just regular people trying to save a piece of their history. Marcus finished mopping and wheeled his cart away. As he changed out of his work clothes in the small janitor's closet, he made a decision. This time, he wouldn't just read about a case. This time, he would do something about it. That same afternoon, Marcus sat in his small legal clinic. The place wasn't fancy. The walls needed paint. The chairs were old and worn. But to the people who came here for help, it was a place of hope. Today, 5 people from the community group were sitting across from Marcus. There was Mrs. Wilson, an old woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 60 years. Next to her was James Carter, the grandson of the man who had built the Carter building. There was also Pastor Thomas from the local church and 2 young college students who had started the Save Our History group. "The court hearing is in 3 days," Mrs. Wilson said. her voice shaking. "And we don't have a lawyer. No one wants to fight against the Henderson Company." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about your case. I believe there's a way to save the building." James Carter looked up with hope in his eyes. "Really? How?" Marcus pulled out some old books and papers. The Carter Building was built in 1923. Back then, there was a city law that said buildings over 50 years old with important community value could be protected. That law was never removed from the books. It just got forgotten. Pastor Thomas leaned forward. "So we can use this old law to save the building?" "Yes," Marcus said. "But you need a lawyer who knows how to present this in court. Someone who can stand up to Charles Bennett." The young college student, Lisa, looked confused. "Who's going to do that?" "We've tried every affordable lawyer in the city." Marcus took a deep breath. For 15 years, he had kept his two lives separate. He was Marcus the janitor at night and Marcus the quiet legal helper by day. He never went to court. He never faced other lawyers. He just gave advice and helped with paperwork. But something about this case, about the way Charles Bennett had talked so carelessly about destroying a piece of Black history, made Marcus angry. It made him remember why he went to law school in the first place. "I'll do it," Marcus said simply. Everyone in the room looked shocked. "You?" Mrs. Wilson asked. "But I thought you just gave advice. I didn't know you could go to court." Marcus smiled. "I passed the bar exam 25 years ago. I'm a licensed lawyer. I just don't usually go to court." "Why not?" asked James. Marcus's face grew serious. "That's a long story. But what matters now is that I can help you. And I will." For the next 2 days, Marcus worked harder than he had in years. During the day, he prepared for the case, digging through old city records and law books. At night, he still did his janitor job, mopping floors and emptying trash cans in the same courthouse where he would soon appear as a lawyer. On Wednesday evening, the night before the big court hearing, Marcus was cleaning near courtroom 3 when he saw Charles Bennett working late. The fancy lawyer had papers spread across the table as he practiced his arguments out loud. "The Carter Building has no real historical value," Charles said to the empty room. "It's just an old building that's hurting property values. My client's development will bring jobs and money to the area." Marcus pushed his mop closer, listening carefully. Charles was a good lawyer. His arguments sounded strong. But Marcus knew something Charles didn't, that forgotten law from 1923. As Marcus cleaned, Charles finally noticed him. "Hey, you," Charles called out. "Can you keep it down? I'm preparing for an important case." Marcus nodded without looking up. "Sorry, sir. And while you're at it, could you get me a coffee?" "Black, no sugar," Charles said, not even looking at Marcus anymore. Marcus paused. Tomorrow, they would face each other as equals in court. But tonight, Charles still saw him as just the janitor. "Of course, sir," Marcus said quietly. "Right away." As he walked away to get the coffee, Marcus smiled to himself. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. The morning of the court hearing arrived with bright sunshine. The courthouse steps were crowded with people. On one side stood men in expensive suits from Henderson Development. On the other side, a small group of community members held signs that read, "Save the Carter Building," and "Our History Matters." Inside courtroom 3, Charles Bennett sat at the defense table looking confident. His team of 3 junior lawyers arranged papers and whispered to each other. Charles checked his gold watch and smiled. The community group hadn't even shown up with a lawyer yet. This would be an easy win. Judge Sarah Peterson entered the courtroom, and everyone stood up. She was known as a fair judge who followed the law exactly. She looked at her papers and frowned. "I see the defendant, Henderson Development, is represented by Mr. Bennett, but I don't see any lawyer listed for the plaintiff, the Community Preservation Group." She looked around the courtroom. "Is there a representative for the plaintiff present?" Mrs. Wilson, James Carter, and the other community members sat nervously in the front row. They looked at the door, waiting for Marcus. Charles Bennett stood up with a smug smile. "Your Honor, it appears the plaintiffs couldn't find legal representation. Perhaps they realize their case has no merit. I suggest we dismiss this matter and—" The courtroom door opened, and Marcus walked in. But he didn't look like the Marcus that Charles knew. Gone were the blue work clothes and mop. Instead, Marcus wore a simple but clean dark suit. He carried a worn leather briefcase that had seen better days, but still looked professional. "Sorry I'm late, Your Honor," Marcus said in a clear, strong voice that filled the room. Marcus Johnson, representing the Community Preservation Group. Charles's mouth fell open in shock. He stared at Marcus, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was this some kind of joke? The janitor who had brought him coffee last night was now claiming to be a lawyer. Judge Peterson looked confused too. "Mr. Johnson, are you a licensed attorney in this state?" Marcus walked forward and handed the court clerk his credentials. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been a member of the state bar for 25 years. The judge examined the papers and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. You may proceed, Mr. Johnson." Charles finally found his voice. He laughed loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This man is the courthouse janitor. I saw him mopping floors last night." Marcus turned to face Charles directly for the first time. "Mr. Bennett, I am indeed employed as a custodial worker in this courthouse. I'm also a licensed attorney. The two are not mutually exclusive." Charles's face turned red. "This is some kind of trick," he sputtered. Judge Peterson banged her gavel. "Mr. Bennett, control yourself. Mr. Johnson has presented valid credentials. His employment outside this courtroom is irrelevant." The community members in the audience looked at each other in surprise. They knew Marcus ran a small legal clinic, but none of them knew he also worked as the courthouse janitor. "Now," the judge continued, "let's proceed with the case. Mr. Johnson, as the plaintiff's counsel, you may present your opening statement." Marcus stood before the court, calm and prepared. The years of reading legal documents after hours, of quietly observing court cases while he cleaned, had taught him more than any continuing education course could. "Your Honor," Marcus began, "this case is about more than just a building. It's about a community's right to preserve its history." His voice grew stronger with each word. The Carter Building was one of the first black-owned businesses in this city. It survived the Great Depression. It survived when angry mobs tried to burn it down in 1967. And now it faces destruction not by hate, but by indifference. Charles watched Marcus with narrowed eyes. The janitor he had barely noticed, the man he had ordered around like a servant, was now speaking with the confidence and skill of a seasoned attorney. And for the first time since the case began, Charles felt a flicker of worry. Marcus continued his opening statement with a quiet power that made everyone in the courtroom listen closely. He didn't use fancy words or complicated legal talk. He spoke simply, but his words were strong. "Your Honor, in 1923, the city passed a law called the Historical Preservation Act. This law says that buildings with special meaning to a community can be protected if they are more than 50 years old." Marcus held up an old yellow paper. This law was never taken off the books. It was just forgotten. Charles Bennett jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. I've never heard of such a law. If it existed, surely the city's legal department would have mentioned it." Judge Peterson looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. "Mr. Johnson, can you prove this law exists?" Marcus nodded and handed copies of the old law to the judge, to Charles, and to the court clerk. "I found this in the city archives. It has never been repealed. It is still valid." The judge read through the document carefully. Charles flipped through the pages with an angry look on his face. His junior lawyers whispered urgently among themselves. "Your Honor," Charles said, "even if this old law does exist, the Carter Building doesn't qualify as historically important. It's just an old business building. There are hundreds like it." Marcus was ready for this argument. With permission, Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness, Professor James Hill from the State University. An older white man with a beard and glasses walked to the witness stand. After he was sworn in, Marcus asked him about his job. I'm a professor of local history, Dr. Hill explained. I studied this city's buildings for 30 years. And what can you tell us about the Carter Building? Marcus asked. Dr. Hill's face lit up. The Carter Building is a treasure. It was built by Samuel Carter in 1923, one of the first black business owners in our city. During a time when black citizens couldn't shop in many stores, the Carter Building provided services to everyone. During the Great Depression, Mr. Carter let people who couldn't pay rent stay in the upper floors. During the Civil Rights Movement, the building was a safe meeting place. As the professor talked, many people in the courtroom nodded. Some of the older community members had tears in their eyes. Charles tried to fight back. But the building is falling apart now. It's not safe. That's not true, Marcus replied. He called his next witness, a building inspector who had examined the Carter Building just 1 week earlier. The building needs some repairs, the inspector said, but its basic structure is solid. It could last another 100 years with proper care. By now, Charles was looking worried. His easy case was turning difficult. He hadn't prepared for any of this. He decided to try a different approach. Your Honor, Charles said, Henderson Development will create jobs and bring money to this neighborhood. They'll build new apartments and shops. Isn't that more important than an old building? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he called Mrs. Wilson to the stand. She was 82 years old, and she walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. Mrs. Wilson, Marcus asked gently, how long have you lived in this neighborhood? All my life, she said in a clear voice. My mama took me to the Carter Building when I was just a little girl. When no other doctor would see black patients, Dr. Miller on the second floor treated everyone. When I needed my first job, Mr. Carter's son hired me to work in the flower shop. That building isn't just bricks and wood. It's our lives. The courtroom was completely silent. Even some of the Henderson Development people looked uncomfortable now. Judge Peterson checked her watch. We'll take a 30-minute break, she announced. When we return, Mr. Bennett can present his case. As people filed out of the courtroom, Charles grabbed his phone and frantically called his office. Get me everything you can find on Marcus Johnson, he snapped, and find out everything about this 1923 law. Now, Charles looked across the room where Marcus sat calmly talking to the community members. The janitor lawyer had come prepared, and for the first time in his career, Charles Bennett was scared of losing. During the break, the courthouse hallway buzzed with excitement. People who had just come to watch their own cases were now staying to see what would happen next in courtroom 3. Word spread quickly about the janitor who turned out to be a brilliant lawyer. In a small meeting room, Charles Bennett sat with his team. His face was red with anger. How could you not know about this 1923 law? He shouted at his junior lawyers. And how did none of you recognize that the janitor has a law degree? One of the young lawyers looked up from his laptop. Sir, I found some information about Marcus Johnson. He graduated top of his class from Howard University Law School 25 years ago. He worked at Miller and Price Law Firm for 3 years and won several big cases. Then what happened? Charles demanded. Why is he pushing a mop instead of practicing law? The young lawyer looked uncomfortable. There was a case, a big one. Johnson defended a young black man accused of robbing a store. He proved the man was innocent, but the real robber was the son of Judge William Crawford. Charles's eyes widened. Everyone knew about Judge Crawford. He had been powerful and mean. He had friends in every important place in the city. Crawford was furious that Johnson had embarrassed his family. The young lawyer continued. He used his connections to make trouble for Johnson. Suddenly, no law firm would hire him. His clients disappeared. Eventually, Johnson had to take whatever job he could find. Charles sat back in his chair thinking. So Marcus Johnson had been a rising star lawyer whose career was destroyed by a corrupt judge. And now, after all these years, he was back in court. Meanwhile, in another small room, Marcus sat quietly with Mrs. Wilson and the other community members. "Why didn't you tell us you were the courthouse janitor?" James Carter asked. Marcus smiled slightly. "I found that people treat you differently when they think you're just the cleaning man. You become invisible. You hear things you're not supposed to hear. You see things others don't notice. But why be a janitor at all?" Pastor Thomas asked. "You're clearly a talented lawyer." Marcus looked down at his hands. "That's a long story. But the short version is that I made some powerful enemies many years ago. Working as a janitor paid the bills while I slowly built my small practice, helping people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers." Back in the courtroom, Judge Peterson called everyone to order. "Mr. Bennett, you may present your case now." Charles stood up, still shaken by what he had learned. He tried to focus on his arguments about property values, tax benefits, and new jobs. But his usual confidence was gone. He kept looking at Marcus, seeing him in a new light. When Charles finished his presentation, it was time for each side to make their closing arguments. Marcus stood up and faced the judge. "Your Honor, this case is simple. There is a law that protects buildings like the Carter Building. This law was made to save important places when money and power threatened to destroy them. That's exactly what's happening now." He turned to look at all the people in the courtroom. "The law doesn't exist just for the rich or powerful. It exists for everyone. The people in this community may not have fancy lawyers or money for big court battles, but they have the law on their side. And the law says their history matters." Charles listened to Marcus speak and felt something he rarely experienced: doubt. Not just about winning the case, but about whether he was on the right side. Judge Peterson listened carefully to both sides. Finally, she spoke. "This is clearly a complex case with strong feelings on both sides. I will need time to review all the evidence and arguments. Court will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. when I will deliver my decision." As people left the courthouse, reporters rushed up to Marcus. They wanted to know about the janitor lawyer who had stood up to one of the biggest firms in town. But Marcus just smiled and walked away. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Marcus didn't show up for his janitor shift. He was too busy preparing for the next day's decision. That night, Charles Bennett couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his king-sized bed in his big house on the hill. He kept seeing Marcus Johnson's face, first as the quiet janitor mopping floors, then as the confident lawyer fighting for his community. Around midnight, Charles got up and went to his home office. He opened his laptop and began to read everything he could find about Marcus Johnson. The more he read, the more impressed he became. 25 years ago, Marcus had been a star. He had won cases that everyone thought were impossible to win. He had helped poor people fight against big companies. He had been known for his honesty and his clever mind. Then came the case of Tyrone Washington, a young man accused of robbing a store. Marcus had proven that Tyrone was innocent. The real robber turned out to be the son of Judge Crawford, one of the most powerful men in the city. After that, Marcus's career fell apart. No one would hire him. No one would take his calls. Charles closed his laptop and looked out the window at the city lights. He had always been proud of being a lawyer. He had always thought he was on the right side. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Would the janitor lawyer win against the big city attorney? Would the old building be saved? Judge Peterson entered the room, and everyone stood. She looked serious as she sat down and arranged her papers. "I have reviewed all the evidence and arguments in this case," she said. "Both sides have made strong points, but I must follow the law as it is written." The room was completely quiet. Mrs. Wilson held James Carter's hand tightly. The Henderson Development people leaned forward in their seats. "The Historical Preservation Act of 1923 is indeed still valid law in this city," Judge Peterson continued. "And based on the evidence presented, The Carter building clearly qualifies for protection under this law. A happy murmur spread through the community members. Some hugged each other. Mrs. Wilson wiped tears from her eyes. Therefore, the judge said, I rule in favor of the plaintiffs. The Carter building cannot be demolished. It must be preserved as a historical site. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Marcus sat quietly, a small smile on his face. He had done it. He had won his first court case in over 20 years. Charles Bennett sat in shock. He had lost. His perfect record was broken. He would have to tell his client, one of the richest men in the city, that his plans for luxury apartments had been stopped by a janitor lawyer and an old law from 1923. As the court emptied, Charles found himself walking toward Marcus. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say. Sorry for treating you like you were nothing. Sorry for not seeing who you really were. Marcus looked up as Charles approached. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Congratulations, Charles finally said, holding out his hand. You fought well. Marcus looked at the offered hand for a moment before shaking it. Thank you, he said simply. I didn't know. Charles began, then stopped. About your history, about what happened to you. Marcus's face showed no anger, only a quiet strength. Most people don't look beyond what they first see, he said. They see a janitor and think that's all I am. They don't ask why or how I got there. Charles felt shame wash over him. He had been one of those people. He had seen the blue uniform and nothing else. What will you do now? Charles asked. Marcus looked over at the happy community members who were still celebrating their victory. Keep helping people who need it, he said. That's what I've always tried to do, with or without a fancy office. As Marcus walked away to join his clients, Charles stood alone, thinking about everything he had just learned. About the law, about justice, and about not judging a man until you know his full story. The next day, the story of Marcus Johnson was all over the local news. Courthouse janitor reveals secret identity as legal genius, read one headline. Janitor lawyer saves historic building, said another. A photo of Marcus standing on the courthouse steps with the community members appeared on the front page of the city newspaper. Marcus's small legal clinic was suddenly full of people. Some came to thank him. Others came hoping he would take their cases. His phone rang nonstop. He had to ask Pastor Thomas to help him answer calls and organize the crowd. I can't help everyone, Marcus told the pastor with a worried look. I'm just one person. Meanwhile, Charles Bennett was having the hardest meeting of his life. He sat in the big conference room at Henderson Development, explaining to Mr. Henderson why they had lost the case. A janitor beat you. Mr. Henderson shouted, his face red with anger. How is that possible? I pay your firm millions of dollars a year. Charles took a deep breath. Mr. Henderson, Marcus Johnson is much more than a janitor. He's a brilliant lawyer who had his career destroyed because he stood up for what was right. Mr. Henderson didn't care about Marcus's story. He only cared about his building project. Fix this, he demanded. I don't care how. Just fix it. Charles knew what Mr. Henderson meant. Use money. Find a way around the law. Do whatever it takes. In the past, Charles would have done exactly that. He would have found a loophole or paid someone off or filed appeal after appeal until the other side gave up. But now, thinking about Marcus mopping floors for 15 years because he refused to compromise his values, Charles couldn't do it. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson, Charles said, standing up. I can't help you anymore. The law is clear. The Carter building stays. Mr. Henderson's face turned even redder. You're fired, he shouted, and I'll make sure everyone in this city knows you failed. Charles walked out of the building feeling strangely light. For the first time in years, he had chosen what was right over what was profitable. That evening, Marcus was closing up his small clinic when there was a knock at the door. He was surprised to see Charles Bennett standing there. Can I come in? Charles asked. Marcus nodded and opened the door wider. The two men sat down in the small waiting room. "I heard you got fired," Marcus said. News traveled fast in the legal community. Charles smiled slightly. "Yes, it turns out standing up to Richard Henderson isn't good for your career." "I know something about that," Marcus said with a small smile of his own. There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," Charles finally said. "This neighborhood needs good legal help. Your clinic is overflowing now. You can't do it all alone." Marcus looked at him with surprise. "What are you suggesting?" "A partnership," Charles said simply. "I have connections, resources. You have the trust of the community and, well, a moral compass I seem to have misplaced somewhere along the way." Marcus studied Charles's face, looking for any sign of dishonesty. "Why would you want to work with me? I'm just a janitor, remember?" Charles winced at the reminder of his earlier behavior. "I was wrong, and I'm trying to make it right." Marcus thought for a long moment. He had spent years watching Charles Bennett win cases without caring who got hurt. Could people really change? "It won't be easy," Marcus warned. "The people here don't have money for fancy legal services. The work is hard, and the pay is small." Charles looked around the simple office with its worn furniture and stacks of papers. "I've had enough of easy," he said. "I want to do something that matters." Marcus slowly extended his hand. "Then welcome to Johnson Legal Services. We help people first, worry about money second." As they shook hands, both men knew that everything had changed. For Marcus, a second chance at the career he loved. For Charles, a chance to become the kind of lawyer he had once dreamed of being. 6 months passed. The small office of Johnson and Bennett Legal Services was no longer small. They had moved to a bigger space just 2 blocks from the Carter Building. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, and the walls were decorated with pictures of community members and newspaper stories about their cases. Marcus and Charles worked side by side every day. At first, people were suspicious of Charles. They remembered him as the fancy lawyer who tried to tear down their historical building. But slowly, as they saw him working long hours and fighting hard for them, they began to trust him. One Tuesday morning, a young woman named Tasha Williams came into their office. She looked scared and was holding papers from her landlord. "They want to kick me out of my apartment," she explained, her voice shaking. "The rent went up, and I can't pay it. I have 2 small children and nowhere to go." Marcus read through the papers carefully. "This doesn't look right," he said. "The landlord can't raise rent this much with no warning." Charles was looking at his computer. "Wait a minute," he said. "Is your building on Elm Street? The big brick one with the green doors?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, that's it." Charles's face grew serious. "That building was just bought by Henderson Development last month." Marcus and Charles looked at each other. This wasn't a coincidence. Richard Henderson was still angry about losing the Carter Building case. Now he was buying other properties in the neighborhood and raising rents so high that people had to move out. "He's trying to force people out so he can tear down the buildings and build something new," Charles said. Marcus nodded. "And if enough people leave the neighborhood, there won't be a community left to protect the Carter Building." They explained the situation to Tasha. She wasn't surprised. "5 other families in my building got the same papers yesterday," she said. "Everyone is scared." "We'll help you," Marcus promised. "And all your neighbors too. This isn't just about one apartment. This is about saving the whole neighborhood." That evening, Marcus and Charles called a community meeting at the church. The room was packed with worried people, all holding similar papers from their landlords. "Henderson Development is trying to push you out," Charles explained. "But there are laws to protect tenants. You have rights, and we're going to fight for them." People nodded and murmured in agreement. They were still afraid, but now they had hope. After the meeting, Charles stayed to answer questions. Marcus stepped outside for some fresh air and found Mrs. Wilson sitting on the church steps. "You know," she said with a smile, "when all this started, we just wanted to save one building. Now look what's happening." Marcus sat down beside her. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Wilson gestured toward the church, where Charles was still talking with community members. "That man used to be one of them, the people who saw us as nothing. Now he's one of us. People can change when they see the truth." Marcus thought about his own journey, from top lawyer to janitor to community defender. "Yes, they can," he agreed. "But it's not always easy." Mrs. Wilson patted his hand. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, Marcus. You taught me that." Inside the church, Charles finished answering questions and looked around for Marcus. So much had changed in 6 months. He had lost his fancy office and high-paying clients. His old lawyer friends didn't call anymore, but for the first time in years, he felt proud of his work. As he stepped outside, he saw Marcus and Mrs. Wilson talking. He was about to join them when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he knew well: Judge Sarah Peterson, who had ruled on the Carter building case. "Hello," Charles answered, wondering why the judge would call him after hours. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, her voice urgent, "I think you and Mr. Johnson need to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. There's something you both need to see." The next morning, Marcus and Charles arrived at Judge Peterson's office early. They didn't know what to expect, but the judge's urgent call had worried them both. Judge Peterson welcomed them into her private office and closed the door. On her desk was a thick folder with QOMFIDE2IL stamped on it in red letters. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said. "What I'm about to show you must stay in this room for now." She opened the folder and spread out several papers. "These documents were sent to me anonymously yesterday. They show that Richard Henderson has been bribing city officials to change zoning laws and ignore building violations." Marcus and Charles leaned forward to look at the papers. There were copies of checks, secret meeting notes, and emails between Henderson and 3 city council members. "This is serious," Charles said. "He's breaking the law." Judge Peterson nodded. "And there's more. Look at this." She pointed to a paper with today's date on it. "The City Council is voting this afternoon on a new rule that would cancel the Historical Preservation Act. If it passes, the Carter building won't be protected anymore." Marcus felt his stomach drop. So that's why Henderson has been so confident. He's been planning to change the law all along. The judge looked troubled. "I can't stop the vote. And I can't use these papers in court yet because we don't know where they came from. But I thought you should know what's happening." Charles stood up straight, determination on his face. "We need to stop that vote. We need to show these documents to the other council members before they vote." "But we don't know who we can trust," Marcus said. "If 3 council members are taking bribes, others might be too." They sat in silence for a moment, thinking hard. Then Marcus smiled slowly. "I know someone we can trust, someone who has been fighting for this community her whole life." 1 hour later, Marcus and Charles sat in the mayor's office with Mrs. Wilson. Mayor Gloria Thompson had grown up with Mrs. Wilson. They had been friends for 60 years. "These are serious charges," the mayor said after looking at the documents. "If this is true, Henderson and those council members could go to jail." "It's true," Charles said. "I worked for Henderson. I know how he operates. I just never knew he went this far." The mayor picked up her phone. "The vote is in 3 hours. We need to move fast." That afternoon, the city council meeting was more crowded than usual. The community members from the church meeting were all there. So were reporters from every local newspaper and TV station. Mayor Thompson walked to the front of the room with a serious face. "Before we begin today's vote, I have an important announcement. The FBI has just opened an investigation into Richard Henderson and 3 members of this council for bribery and corruption." The room erupted in shocked voices. The 3 guilty council members turned pale. "The vote on changing the Historical Preservation Act will be postponed indefinitely," the mayor continued. She nodded to where Marcus and Charles sat with Mrs. Wilson. "And I want to thank the attorneys from Johnson and Bennett Legal Services for bringing this matter to light." Richard Henderson, who was sitting in the back of the room, stood up and stormed out. His plan had failed. 1 week later, Marcus was unlocking the door to his office when Charles arrived with coffee for both of them. "Have you seen this?" Charles asked, holding up the morning newspaper. The headline read, "Henderson Development CEO arrested on multiple charges." Marcus smiled. Justice takes time, but it usually arrives eventually. As they walked into their office, the phone was already ringing. The waiting room would soon be full of people who needed their help. "You know," Charles said as he put down his briefcase, "a year ago, I was mocking a janitor in court. Now I'm his partner. Life is strange." Marcus laughed. "Life is fair, eventually. That's why we do this work, to help make sure of it." Outside their window, the Carter building stood tall in the morning sun, its old bricks glowing with history and promise. Thanks to an unlikely partnership between a mocked janitor and the lawyer who had learned to see beyond appearances, it would continue to stand for many years to come.